Racked with sorrow, wrapped in care. Rapt in both senses of the word, including the one which calls for a declamation which is both rapid and rhythmical. On a staircase, drenched in poison, in a house that's not a home, a mausoleum and museum, where sarcophagi have hammers, strings, and keys, from which one flees, there stands a wraith who has been hobbled, and whose hips are not quite working in the ways she might have wanted, as she lectures to a crowd that's filled with flashbacks of the gods they used to worship, who are crazed in their impatience with the cruelty of the living, hence they dream up pointless cakewalks, which are danced by mortal puppets, who are dangled from a rope not made of velvet, spun by zombies in the back rooms and the loos of bombed-out coal bins, lit with candles on the wane as they complain about their roommates who don't follow all the rules that they have laid out for the chess games with their rivals who are often non-compliant with the edicts they've established, hence deserving of their fates, which will be ghastly and abysmal. If you listen, you can hear their dismal cries upon the wind. On a sofa, foul and blotted, built by crones on blasted heaths, there sits a monkey who's been trained to be a stand-in for the host, who'll raise a toast in praise of hordes of broken spirits who now hover in the ether, dumb and speechless, and the hostess who'd been forced to run away and then discover she'd been banished to eternal putrefaction underground, where one can find her rotting coffin stuffed with dogma and a ton of kitty litter, which has never ever changed, and which are choking helpless tenants with their vile hateful doctrines and their stench of piss and feces, which her vile inamorato thinks is fine, as does his mistress, both of whom have never loved, just like their mothers, who before them and before the throne of God, who once had scorned them, but whose crimes are long forgotten, hence forgiven, whom they once took care to worship during long abandoned rites, which were obscene and went unheard by cloth-haired children, who have now been forced to live beneath the streets in grimy bunkers where the Nazis drew their sketches and then took their final breaths, and who now double as the playthings of the harpies who once bore them all in clinics run by mobsters who then bilk those moms' insurance and implant those fiendish demons into wombs which were all teeming with the shards of broken glass, and which would nurture all those insects who would come one day to gnaw upon the guts of clueless victims who'd been chosen not by fate, but far more likely by some fishwife from Wisconsin, whom it's right to do our best to never name. Are we all unwitting monsters? Or just those who would impose the very worst upon a world which almost surely would be better off without them, those whose books are always written by and sold to white trash morons with no insides and whose outsides are just filth composed in mud baths drawn and quartered in a fraction of a second, which is close enough for jazz, which doesn't swing on sets of playgrounds full of dust and strewn with ashes they've encased in shabby urns, which help to keep their horrid mouths shut in regards to all the games of life in closets, which are closest to secreting all the clay which is then made into the creatures who will deign to do their bidding on a game show which was fixed but now lies broken, flat as pancakes, drenched in war paint by old widows, chefs, and vipers, spitting venom that infects them with desires which will drive them to the brink of utter madness while they're grasping at their freedom from the masters they acclaim with endless praise that is most fulsome. At the same time they are busy rubbing fat and bloated bellies filled with gruel which has grown rancid, and about which they are mocked and scorned by all those selfsame masters who stand frightful in their guilt, and from whom one ought run away, because within them there's no good, but only bitterness, and seeking after truths they know are lies, which were invented long ago by apparitions who had once displayed charisma, but are now just propaganda for agendas of the 2-bit porcine porcine priestess who is hobbling down the stairs now that her surgery is finished, which has left her somewhat hampered, it is true, but still quite able to spew garbage into landfills she has tended over years spent planning crimes which now have come to their fruition. She intended that her spouse might comprehend that there's no way in which his nightmare can be ended or his bleeding guts e'er mended, which does not require dying, or at least his being beaten down by clubs, in which he'll never be accepted or a member, and who will then be drawn and quartered and propelled unto a scaffold, where he's washed and dried and hung, and will become most well and truly a dessert for birds to gorge on, like Medusas, who can't speak nor can they sing, but only shriek the music dramas of that villain Richard Wagner on a stage made out of newly chopped down woodlands, set aflame and then aside. For it won't matter, because his wishes count for nothing, and in fact the Harpy's plan is to ensure he'll be embalmed while still alive upon a bier that's made of human flesh and bone, that's in a room which will be brimming full to bursting with an ancient mother-lode of hungry spirits, quite unyielding, who will brook no independence through the days and nights of longing he will spend upon a bed of rusty nails, screws, and hooks, on which once hung beloved paintings on the walls of former dwellings when his self was still intact, before the storms which are not stressed in history books contrived by victors who enable ethnic cleansing and engage in widespread slaughter sans regret for all to see. And when those hips have healed, there will be dancing in her mind and in the streets as he's unmanned in ghastly rites to be observed by vile daughters who are clones of other daughters, who themselves were also daughters of the monsters who had set this thing in motion in the first place. With the last laugh at the dawn of time remembered, then forgotten, there's no difference to be split amongst the soldiers neath the branches of that weeping, withered, barely upright tree in which poor Jesus hangs suspended. Can you hear him? He is moaning in a wind which takes no heed, but wouldn't care had it the ears to hear his cries before he dies. But even he who's now abandoned, God has flown, is just a bastard who's unworthy of one's pity at the end of those 3 days spent on the hill where scumbag losers such as he are all impaled. So turn the page and drink a toast and dance the night away, and please forget the things you've read here, for the world is full of torments which reside on heads of pins, which burst balloons as well as dreams that they and he had once upon a time believed might come to pass, but that was then and this is now, and they've awoken to a nightmare in which clouds and skies and dreams and gods are silent, and their heartbeats are unsteady, and their throats are all encrusted with the words they cannot utter that might matter to some soul who chanced to hear them in the dark primeval woodland, where they've lived, it seems, forever. Were they able just to speak, much less to beg for their salvation from their fate in that decrepit ancient forest, where they'll close their eyes forever, and perhaps will not be jeered at. None the less, they'll ne'er be noticed, nor be mourned.